Hi everyone, today I'm going to share with you my experience with this ASRock motherboard known as the Z790 Tachi Lite. Before I begin, I'd like to thank ASRock to have provided this motherboard for me to share with you guys, and also to our local distro, Tech Dynamic, to have done the arrangement on the delivery. Let's begin. When you remove all the items from the box, you'll be first ushered with the main board, and this main board is wrapped with this anti-static bag. And I did notice that of all the ASRock motherboard that I purchased, it always comes with a foam to protect the back of your motherboard. A nice touch from ASRock. Besides this, you have the instruction manual, a postcard, and as for accessories, first thing, which is the Wi-Fi antenna. I've removed the antennas from the box itself. This is for your Wi-Fi. And these are your accessories. You'll be given total of 4 M.2 screws for you to fasten your M.2 to the motherboard, a keycap for you to change, one set of SATA cable where you have one right angle and the other one straight, 2 Velcro stripes for you to do cable management. Oh, my mistake, it comes in 2 sets of SATA where you have 2 cables which is at right angle and 2 cables which is straight. And this is additional USB 2 connection where you connect this to the USB 2 header on your motherboard to give you additional USB port. This is an EATX motherboard that has a measurement from here all the way to here. It's at 305mm, and from the top to the bottom is 265mm. The height measurements of the side heatsink VRM to the motherboard and the rear heatsink to the motherboard, from the top of the side VRM heatsink to the motherboard is at 32mm in height. And for the rear, at the top of the rear I/O heatsink to the motherboard is at 42mm tall. At the top, you'll be ushered with 2 very large heatsink. These are aluminium, no plastic. As some of the motherboards, you have this plastic cover, but this board here is solid aluminium, and this is meant to cool your VRM. The power phase of this motherboard is 24 plus 1 plus 2 with 105 ampere choke. At this section, this is your 1700 socket, just to show you. And these are the pins. And at all times, please keep this latch closed when you're not placing the processor itself, because you wouldn't want to accidentally hit the pin and to dent the pins. And this 1700 socket support your Intel Generation 12, 13 and the upcoming Generation 14 processor. Over at this section, you have 4 DIMM slots that support only DDR5 RAMs, and it has a capacity of 192GB storage or memory, and the XMP profile, you can go up to 7200, and it's of course dual channel. Now besides this, there are M.2s over here. Total there are 5 M.2 slots, but in practical usage you'll be only using 4 M.2 slots. Why I said this? Let me just remove all this. Now physically there are 5 slots, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but practically you can only use 4. Reason being, right, at this top slot that's controlled by your processor, if you are using Generation 5 M.2s, you will slot it this way. So when you place this, right, you can't place another at the top. That's why I'm saying that you are using only physical usage is only 4 slots. Now back to where I was. If you sort this position, this is for your Gen 5 M.2. Let's say you're running Gen 4, you'll be placing at the back, sorting to the back. So this is how it looks. Now the rest of the slot, which is at the bottom section, 1, 2, 3, this is controlled by your Z790 chipset over here, and all these are Generation 4. One thing good about this motherboard itself, all this M.2 slot are with armor shield, meaning to say it will dissipate all the heat from the M.2 to the armor shield. And all this armor shield comes with thermal pads. Now there's one additional M.2 slot which is meant for your Wi-Fi. This is pre-installed, which is the Wi-Fi 6E adapter, and it does have Bluetooth function, which is at version 5.3. There are a total of 3 PCIe expansion slots, where the first 2 slots is controlled by the processor and the bottom slot is controlled by your Z790 chipset. Now for the first 2 slots, these are generation 5 that runs on X16. So either of the slot that you plug your graphic card will be running on X16. If you were to populate both at the same time with 2 graphic cards, then you'll be X8, X8. Also to take note, in the event if you were to plug a Gen 5 M.2 at this slot over here, the slot over here will not be running on X16. It will downgrade to X8. Take note on this. And also, if you were to populate the second PCIe slot, this generation 5 slot, or should I say M.2 slot, will be disabled. So you wouldn't be able to run a Gen 5 M.2 if you populate the second PCIe slot. On the last slot over here, which is a Gen 4 that runs on X4. Now, if you were to populate this, right, the front SATA 4 ports at the lower end, which is 1, 2, bottom 3 and 4, it will be disabled. So take note on this. The headers of this board are as follows. I'll start off with the bottom. On my lower left, this is the audio header, where you connect your front microphone and headphone connector to this port. Next will be the CMOS pin, or should I say clear CMOS pin, followed by a 12-volt RGB connector, a 3-pin 5-volt ARGB connector, 2 4-pin PWM fan header, a USB version 3.2 generation 1 port. This is meant for your front I/O, where you have the type A and connects on this port here. And the transfer rate of this port is at 5 gigabits per second. Followed by 2 USB 2.0 port, a debug LED. In the event you have pieced up all the components on your system and you boot up, it doesn't pause or it doesn't go to the Windows screen and such, an error code will be posted over here. And with that, you can refer this error code against your motherboard instruction manual and to find out which section you need to rectify the problem on your motherboard itself. It could be RAMs, it could be processor and such. 2 more additional 4-pin PWM fan header, a reset switch, a start switch, a clear CMOS button. This board is built unique, where you can clear CMOS 2 ways. Now when you clear the CMOS, make sure that your system is powered down, leaving the power connection on and such, but not with the system on. To clear the CMOS, where your configuration you do not want them, you want to clear it, you can click on this button, or to short the CMOS pins over here. Either method will work. Next you have the TPM connector, another 4-pin PWM fan connector, and at the front over here there are all these pinouts. This is meant for your front power switch, your reset switch, your power LEDs and your hard disk LED. Moving to the front, you'll be ushered with 8 SATA port, another 3.2 USB port generation 1. As mentioned, if you have additional type A port at the front and make use of the 3.2 connector, right, you can connect over here. So again, it's generation 1. The transfer rate is 5 gigabits per second. Next will be the type C port, which is meant for your front I/O. This is generation 2, version 3.2, and in fact it's generation 2 times 2. It has a transfer rate of 20 gigabytes per second. In the event you have a external hard disk that make use of Type-C and is have a transfer rate of 20 gigabytes per second. You can do the transfer using this port, not an issue, to the rest of your M.2 or maybe to your hard drive. Besides doing the transfer of data, this port has another function. If you can see over here, this is a PCIe 6-pin slot. If you were to connect from your PSU, the 6-pin PCIe connector, to this socket which supply the power, this will power up the Type-C port and giving this Type-C port a power delivery of 60 watt, which is fast charging. So besides the port from functioning as a data transfer port, it is also a chargeable port to all your mobile devices like your iPhone, iPad, Android devices and such. Next, you'll be ushered with 24-pin connector. This is whereby you connect the PSU 24-pin connector to this. Over here, you'll be ushered with 2 more 3-pin 5V ARGB connector. At the top, you have 2 4-pin PWM fan connector. And over here, you have 2 8-pin EPS connector. Now, at all times, in fact, you only need one in order to power up and to bring the power to your processor and your VRMs. Unless you're doing overclocking, extreme overclocking, like the liquid nitrogen overclocking, and you want more power to your motherboard, then make use of the 2 8-pin EPS connector. But for normal usage and light overclocking, I would advise you just to plug one, which is more than enough to power up your board and to do the light overclocking. At the rear, on my left, you are first ushered with 2 USB 2.0 port. These are meant for your mouse and keyboard, followed by an HDMI port where it makes use of the processor integrated graphic card, be it you're using the 12 Gen, 30 Gen or the upcoming 14 Gen processor. And you'll be able to project out up to 4K 60Hz, followed by a set of Wi-Fi socket where you plug your antenna to this, and this support Wi-Fi 6E, and it does have Bluetooth function that is at version 5.3. Over at this section, these are the audio connector where you first connect your microphone here. Next will be the speaker and followed by the SPDIF. Now there are a total of 8 Type A USB port, and for the 6 over here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, this will have a transfer rate of 5 gigabits per second, as these are all generation 1. And on the extreme right, where you have this 2 port, these are generation 2, where it has a transfer rate of 10 gigabits per second. At the bottom, you have 2 Type-C port. Now this is coming interesting. Both of these are Thunderbolt 4 ports, where it has a transfer rate of 40 gigabytes per second, and you can charge your device with this port. Things like your iPhone, your iPad, or your Android devices or tablet. Now for iPhone, it's on iPhone 15, which is having the Type-C port, or you can transfer data with external hard drive and such that make use of 40 gigabytes per second. Besides doing data transfer and charging, this 2 port is also acting as a projection of monitors. If you have a monitor that has Type-C, you can connect that to this port, and if you connect to one port, will be at 8K at 80 Hz. Else, if you were to connect both to one monitor each, both will be running on 4K 60 Hz. Now do take note, when you purchase external monitor that has Type-C connectors, make sure you check the model and make sure that this port supports it. If not, you will not be able to project to your Type-C monitor, so take note of this. Right at the top, both these NIC are Intel NICs. One is 1 gig, the other one is 2.5 gig, which is the killer Ethernet. Just an illustration on how the system look like when I power it up. So when you turn on the PSU, right, you will have this underglow LEDs or ARGBs underneath this last piece of M.2 armor shield, and the glow on the power button and the reset switch. So when I power up, you will notice that the debug LED, right, will cycle. See, in fact right now it's doing the memory training, so it just cycle. Once this is done, right, if everything is clear, you should not have the LED mode listed over here. Meaning you say everything will be working fine. See, this means that your board is up and running, the memories are checked, the processor is checked, or even if let's say you plug your graphic card, you'll be checked. Now let me take you to the UEFI of this motherboard. This is how the UEFI look like on this board. There will be two modes. This is the easy mode and the advanced mode. To go to the advanced mode, you either click this button over here that says advanced mode, or press F6 and you will go into the advanced mode. I will start off with the easy mode, where on my top left hand corner, these are the components that you fit on the motherboard itself. I make use of the 13700K processor, and under the DRAM information, which is the RAMs on the DIMM slot, I populated two DIMM slot, which is A2 and B2, with my DDR5 RAMs. And under this section where you have XMP and auto, this is a one-click function. If you were to click on the XMP profile, this will trigger the XMP profile to run at this settings. Now, beneath here, this is the storage configuration. If you were to populate any M.2's 2.5-inch hard disk or a 3.5-inch hard disk, it will show you all the stats over here, as in like the model of what you have placed. For example, let's say a FireCuda 530 or 520 or so on the M.2, it will show over here. Or maybe a Crosshair hard disk, SSD, it will populate under the SATA section. Now at the middle section over here, right, starting from the top, it will show you the CPU temperature, the motherboard temperature, and the CPU voltage, which is your vCore, or what is currently drawing. Now under the power settings here, where it says load Intel base power limit, what this means is if you enable this, right, take for example, I'm using a 13700K that has a max voltage draw of 253 watt. So if you to enable this, right, the system will pull up to 250 watt and stop. And based on the fact that right now the motherboard, whereby the cooling, the more cooler your board can run or your processor can run, right, you will draw more power. So if you do not want to set this as a limit, you allow it to go past 253 watt upon the system decision, you can just disable this. Now underneath here, these are the fan stat, whereby it shows you what are the fans you have connected. Right now I have my radiator fan connected to CPU fan 1. And in order to set the speed of it, right, there are two ways. One is looking below here, right, okay, this is only meant, this setting over here that says standard, right, is only meant for your radiator fans, CPU fan 1. So we can either set it standard, you can go performance, see it increase the RPM, or you can even go full. So you just one touch on the CPU fan 1, and often CPU fan 1 is meant for your air cooler fans or your radiator fans, so take note of this. Let me switch it back to standard. Now on my top right, this is where you see the time. You can adjust the time accordingly, the date accordingly, and such. Right below here, boot priority, well, as mentioned, I have not populated any hard disk or M.2. If you have populated a few, for example, the first M.2 is Windows OS, the second M.2 is Linux, the third maybe some other OS, you can set the priority boot by shifting the position of your hard drive or your M.2s. Instant flash, this is meant for you to flash your BIOS. Let's say you download the latest BIOS, right? You want to do an instant flash, you can just download that BIOS into your USB, plug it to your motherboard rear I/O, and to click on instant flash. So that will flash the thing. Now, earlier on I mentioned about the fan status, whereby this button here, right, only control the CPU fan, the CPU fan 1 header. If you want to control the rest of the CPU, the fans, right, that is populated over here, you can click on Fantastic Tuning, where you bring you to a chart. So you can select accordingly to whichever fan that's on the header itself, right, and to do your configuration. You can use the profile set, which is silent, standard, performance, or full speed. Or even if you choose to do a custom curve, right, just click on custom curve, where you give you different sections: P1, P2, P3, P4, and P5. What does that mean? P1 is the blue line, so you can set accordingly based on the temperature and how much percentage you want the fan to spin. See? Or this is the P2, and this is P3, and this is the last part. In fact, P1 is 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, and 0.5, which is highlighted. You see, when I hover the blue, right, the blue over here, the P1 will be highlighted. So it will tell you that which are the points that you are setting. Okay, let me just discard this. So that's how you do on the simple interface, which kind of like very straightforward. You don't need to think about what to do next and which to select and such. And right at the top over here, right, you have help information that gives you all the short keys. Then you can, let's say you've done all the settings and you don't like the settings of what you've done, you can just reset to default. See, my XMP profile, which I've done earlier, is gone. Next will be save and exit, or you can discard. Now, one thing good about this board here, right, you can make use of the in-house polychrome RGB to turn on or to turn off the ARGB on your motherboard itself. Where I showed you earlier the lightings. Selection of the languages, you can set to the language that you understand. You will just change. For example, let's say I want to change to this. See, all these are in Chinese wording. But of course, I'll be using English. Next will be the advanced mode. Either you click on this button over here or to press on F6. And this is the advanced interface. I love this interface a lot based on the fact of the subtle logo at the background that has my favorite colors, which is blue, cyan, and purple. Now, at the main section at the top, you see here, there are a few sections over here, like the main, the overclock, tweakle, the advanced tools, hardware monitoring, security, boot, and exit. Starting from the main itself, where you see listed over here, these are all the components that you have populated on the motherboard itself: the processor and the DIMM slot of where your RAMs have seated. Now, next will be the OC tweaker, whereby you are first ushered with this CPU B-core compensation. Now, at all times, leave this as auto. By right, your system will run stable by default under auto. But sometimes when you did some overclocking settings, right, and you find that the system is not stable, instead of going deep into the configuration like what I'm showing over here, right, you can do an instant pump, where if you set this right to level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, level 5, it go according to certain voltage. The higher you go, the higher V-core you will go. So gradually you can set, probably right now it's not stable when you do your manual voltage or clock speed or whatever you have configured during your overclocking. You can come here to do just a fast kick on the V-cores and such, and to monitor what you have set. For example, let's say you have set level 2, you can always go to the CPU indicator and to look at the V-cores over here, what's been taken when you set. Alright, Right now it's not showing because I didn't reboot the system. So I'll just leave this to auto. Now, over the function here, right, these are where you do the manual overclocking, your CPU configuration, your DRAMs, your voltages, and your FIVR configuration and such. So once after you've done all the configuration and you're happy with it and you want to save a record, you can always come to this last section here where it says save user default. Now take a look, all these are empty. So assuming you have done your configuration and you want to save the profile, you can just save over here and select whichever slot you want and to name it. And as and when, if let's say the system is not running stable, you can clear the CMOS, but you are able to load the profile which is safe in your system itself. Alright, now some of the tricks that I often like to use on ASRock motherboard, as it's very straightforward. Things that I will do, starting off with the DRAM configuration, I will set the XMP profile. By right, it's actually on auto, so you can set it on XMP profile. And of course, you can do manual configuration. All is needed is just to set all this over here. See? Then your timing and such, your latency on the RAMs. And fantastically, I like this interface because all is in one page. Because some of the motherboards, right, if you want to do certain things, for example, let's say this is the RAM timing and the secondary timing and such, right, there are sub menu where you have to click into it and such, which is very troublesome. So this is one thing good about ASRock layout. I know some might not like it because it's like everything to your face, but to me, you have a overall picture of what you're doing, which is good. Alright, so these are the things that you set, but at all times, if you don't have the time, just set it to XMP profile and just run. Okay, I'll just leave it this way. Next will be the CPU configuration, where you can set your P cores and your E cores and such, the ratio and such. Just to show you, you can set all core, you can set per core, or you can set the specific core of what you want. I'll set this to auto. Now this is for E core, right? This is for P core. It's the same on the P core where you can set all or per core. All these are the ratio. As some of you will know that, oh, the ratio when you set to 54, it means the clock speed at 5400 and such. Okay, again, not going to go into detail, just leave it as it is. Then these are other settings that you can do. And a little trick to this, now I'll bring you all the way to the bottom where it says this Intel based power limit settings. Earlier on I have shown you that if you to enable this, right, the system will not pull more than 253 watt. And if you want the system to go beyond that and to have higher clock speed and you wouldn't mind the temperature, you can just set to disable. So that when you set this to disable, right, it will unlock the lock on the voltage, which is 253 watt. So it depends on how much cooling you can provide to the processor itself, and your motherboard will determine based on the long duration power limit and the short duration power limit and what this tool does. Long duration power limit means to say consistently it will draw at that voltage. For example, right now I have disabled it, so my 13700K is running at a max of 253. With this disabled and the long duration power limit that's set to so high, it doesn't mean that the system will grab 4,000 over watts. No, what it does is it determines how much is needed to pump to the max clock frequency. For example, running at consistently at 5.6, okay, let's say 5.6 gigahertz, and it will draw at a power of, let's say, 350, for example. Okay, do not take note on the figures that are typed over here. I'm just saying, alright. So when your power limit is actually this, right? I mean the duration for the long run, right, is this, right? The system will check, oh, it's bypassed. The user have agreed to me to run above 253. In order to run a 5.6 gig, I will need 300 watt, for example. So you will go beyond the limits of your processor, which is 253, and you will just draw 300 just to run at 5.6. So this is the meaning of why I say that you can either limit it to 253 on a 13700K or to unlock it. But at all times I would advise you to lock it so that you will not, you know, overdrawn the wattage on your processor, and that will prolong the life of your processor. Now, coming to the long duration power limit, as I mentioned, this is the consistency throughout. For my take that is based here in Singapore and my room temperature is 30 degrees Celsius, I will only limit either to 208 watt or 210. That's it. For short power duration, this is whereby at a short period of time, okay, when you're doing compilation work or maybe playing games and things like that, it will pull at a short time for that wattage. You can set it maybe on auto if you don't want to do, oh sorry, you can set it to nothing, which is auto, okay, or to have it limit. But for me, be it whether a short burst or a long burst, I mean long duration, I'll just set it consistent so that your system don't have to think so much. Whatever it needs, at a consistent rate, it will just run at that wattage. So this is my way of doing undervolting. If you guys want to follow, this is the method that I will do. I will set the power limit to enable and to do this. Or if you are comfortable with the consistency on this, right, you can ignore this. In fact, it will not draw, when you set on the long duration and the short duration, right, it will not draw more than 253 watts. In fact, you will stay at 210 watts. This is my limit. Okay, this is system limit. Alright, now back to where I was, to the main page. I've shown you the CPU configuration, I show you the DRAM on your XMP profile. Now come to the voltage configuration, where you set your VCore. Now as you can see here, right, by right, this is actually on auto, so the system will pull accordingly to what it needs, and it always pull the maximum. But I want to cool down my system even further, so what I did is I did an offset. Now by doing this, right, some other motherboards, when you do offset, right, it will affect the multi-core, but for ASRock, no such thing. Alright, it's all determined by just one figure and it configures all. So what happened here is that when I set this to offset, right, your offset voltage you can just minus. Some motherboards you will need to declare whether is it positive or negative, but for this, right, ASRock have a very unique way, as in like it will do an decrement or increment of 5 milliwatt. And most of the time when I use ASRock motherboard, in fact I love to use ASRock motherboard. Reason being, right, I can always set the offset at -100 without any issues, and just leaving all the load line calibration and such on auto. It will just pull accordingly. And I find out something that if I were to feeder more, right, with all the complexity on the load line calibration and such, right, my system will not run stable for some reason. Some will just feeder with the, the levels over here, as you can see. But I find no point. When I do this, right, my system will run unstable unless I set it to a very high load line calibration that draws much more voltages or wattage. So at all times I just leave it auto, let the system run. Alright, there you have it on this section, which is the OC Twinkle. Next will be the advanced mode, where the first thing you can configure is the CPU configuration, whereby you can set all your P calls, your E calls, the frequency itself and such, the hyper thread. See how much you want to activate the P call, how much you want to activate the E calls. But for me, I'll just leave it as it is, and I find it no point to set all this when I'm using to work. But some of you might just want to activate the P call and to disable the E call. Reason being, right, when you're playing games, right, you don't need the E call. But for me, I need both. Now, C state, this is meant for advanced. If you want to configure overclocking, this is all the states that you need to set. I'm not going to go in depth. If you want to know more about C stat, please go and check out more info on the internet. Alright. Then CPU throttling, thermal throttle and such, you can set enable. Now this section here, Intel AVX and AVX2, this is the in thing right now when you do the compilation for video editing and such. If you want to roll back to the old technology, right, you can disable this and to enable the AVX 512. But I don't think anybody will want to use this because the new technology, right, the compilation is even greater at higher resolution and at a smaller file size. So I'll just leave this enabled, this disabled. Intel virtualization technology, this is meant for your sandbox, your VMware and such. If you do not need this, right, you can just disable this. Now normally gamers will disable this because they want more RAMs to be, you know, located in just one area instead of separate them, one for the main and one for the virtual machine. So you will just disable this for gamers, but for me, I'll just leave it on. Sometimes I do use VMware to toggle to another system. Then all this, I will not go into it, just to show you that they are there for you to do the adjustment. Next will be the chipset configuration. You first ushered with the primary graphic card adapter. What this means is, when you set this to auto, and if you're running on the processor integrated graphic card, it will just select that as your primary display port. Else, if you are using a discrete graphic card plugged to the motherboard, even set on auto, right, the integrated graphic card will just be disabled. You will just solely depend on your discrete graphic card. And at the event, if you are not using any discrete graphic card, just the processor integrated graphic card, you can set this to only on board. This is what you meant. Now next you have the above 4G decoding. Well, this is the aperture size on the graphic card itself. I'll just leave it as enable. The CAM, Clever Access Memory, well, this is meant for your resizable bar that most of you use. BTD, I'll leave this at enable. This is meant to trigger your VMware and your sandbox. The rest, I will not go into it except for this section over here where it says PCIe 1, 2 and 3. Now, to make your system fast, if you did plug a discrete graphic card on the first slot, which is PCIe 1, you can do a declaration of what generation it is using. At the moment, most of the graphic cards are running on Gen 4. So we can set it Gen 4. And in future, if you are running on a Gen 5, you can just set it to Gen 5. So what this does is, the system will say that, oh, the user have told me that this port is making use of generation 5. So I don't have to figure and to think about what kind of card is slot to that slot. So by bypassing the DIMMs, right, you will automatically set to Gen 5 and or Gen 4, and we just put the system itself. Now, on the second lane itself, you can also set the generation. Now, do take note that if you have two graphic card slot on PCIe 1 and 2, right, both will not run at full speed x16. It will split the speed as in like 8x and 8x. All right. And the last one I don't have to say, which is the third slot. You can configure the generation 2 if you want to. So right now I'm just going to set this to auto and this to Gen 4. Now over at this section over here, the PCIe Express native control, just leave it as it is enabled. Let the system determine to have the enhanced PCIe power saving mode, okay, in Windows. Now for this ASPM setting that you have 4 over here, I would advise you to read up on the internet, get some information if you are using a ARC A750 or a A770 graphic card. Reason for this, there is some news out there stated that the ARC card, when you're at idle, the power drawn is very high, which is at 40 watt or maybe to 48 watt. So in order to tone that down during idle time when you're not doing anything, because most discrete graphic card in fact will not hit that wattage, it should be around 15 to 18. So having some tweaks over here, which is this, all this you see over here, the ASPM, 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 ASPM. If you feather this correctly, your ARC card, which is the A750 or the A770, will not have a idle drawing wattage of 40 watt. Instead, it will be around 15 to 18 watt. Now the rest over here, which is the iGPU multi-monitor. Now for this, if you have a discrete graphic card and you want to also make use of the onboard graphic card, as in like the processor graphic card, you will have to enable this. If it is set disable, it will go, the projection will only go on the discrete graphic card. So you are not able, even if you plug the HDMI cable on your motherboard rear I/O, it will not project out to the monitor if you have this disabled. So you will need to enable this while you're having the discrete graphic card, so you can use both. Are you guys confused? Integrated and the discrete. Alright, by all times I will just set this to disable, because majority of us, when we plug the discrete graphic card, we would not want to have the system hop on the integrated graphic card, so we will just disable this. Then this, as usual, you can enable your 1 gig Ethernet card or the killer Ethernet card, which is running on 2.5 gig and such. If you're running on one, I will say that you can just disable. In fact, most of the time for me, if I'm not using Nash or anything, I will just use this as my priority internet connection. If you are using a Nash and internet, I would say just disable this and enable this, because most of the time for intranet you can reach up to 2.5 gig depending on your device, whether it support 2.5 gig. If not, okay, you can disable this and just enable this. Just make use of one port. But if you don't care, you can just enable both. Up to you. This is the Fun IO audio, whether you want it on, and the HDMI audio on your onboard on your processor, integrated graphic card and such. And the rest I will not go into it. Now for this, as shown on the easy mode, where you have this polychrome on and off. Now take note, if I were to off it and if I were to switch to this, see, this is off. So this is a one-time switch. Okay, show you again. Now this is off. If I'm to do this on, see, this is on. So this is just a one-time switch where you can make use to turn on and off your ARGB on your motherboard. Then your onboard LED, these are meant for your debug LED and such. Now I wonder, okay, so just leave this as it is. Next will be 2. Now coming to the 2 side, I like this a lot. Reason being, I don't have to install the ARGB application on my Windows itself. Instead, I make use of this, which is the in-house ARGB software. See, where you can select all the headers which I explained to you, the ARGB headers 1, 2 and 3. This PCB is actually on your motherboard that I showed you earlier, which the ARGB effects is under the armor shield. or you can set it all. So with this, right, you can set whatever colors that you want or effects and fiddling with this for the colors, so it will reflect on the motherboard itself. So this is it, and I will just right now go back to rainbow. Next will be hardware monitor. Another beautiful feature about this. Now, a lot of you will like to make use of this graph over here to set your fan curve, but for me, right, I don't like to use this at all. Even if you can customize the settings, I like to see physical figures instead of graph. So what I'll do is, instead of using this section over here, right, I will use the section below, because as you can see, right, okay, this is CPU fan 1, my radiator fans. If I have to set to silence, when I screw up, see, straight away I can tell the fan speed. Right now it's actually 685, or maybe lower, going down. It's at silent mode. And if I were to pump this to performance, take a look. See, it will go up. So this is a fast thing to do, where I can see everything in one page. Or if you choose to set custom, right, you can declare over here, okay, don't get confused about this, temperature followed by the percentage, temperature followed by the percentage, and so on. So assuming, let's say at temperature 40 degrees Celsius, you want the fan to throttle or to spin at a percentage of, let's say, 30%. You can set over here. Then the next percentage, as in like the temperature, let's say it went up to 55 degrees. You want it to run at 60% of your fan, things like that. Now, some of you might some of you might not like this, but personally, I love this a lot. I can see the figures over here, and to manual tune. Same goes to the rest of the configuration, like your CPU fan 2, the CPU fan 2, the chassis fan, and such. Now for CPU fan 2, right, this is the only CPU fan that has 3 ampere of load, whereby you can trigger this to become water pump. So when you switch to water pump, right, the amperage will be 3 ampere. If you set it to CPU fan, this will be at 2 ampere. Now speaking of which, right, I forgot to mention that for, okay, let me just pull all the way up. Now CPU fan 1, this is only at 1 ampere. CPU fan 2 all the way to chassis fan 6, right, all are 2 ampere. So I repeat that again. CPU fan 1 is only 1 ampere. Capable of providing 1 ampere, that's what I mean. CPU fan 2 all the way to 6, right, chassis fan 6, these are 2 ampere. But for CPU fan 2, if you switch this to water pump, it will be at 3 ampere. Okay, let me just show you here. See, if you switch to water pump, you will be running on 3 ampere. Else the rest, right, for chassis fan 1 to 6, right, you also can set to water pump, but it will run on 2 ampere. So ASRock motherboard, in fact, is built for water cooling, in fact, because most of their headers, right, you can switch to water pump, not an issue. See, I'm very familiar with ASRock configuration. And for the rest of the chassis fan, right, you can declare to monitor, for example, let's say chassis fan 3, you have something configured on it. You can either set the mode to PWM, then what things to monitor, be it your CPU going higher, it will trigger. It monitors your motherboard, it will trigger. And based on the fact that you have all this profile over here, inclusive of custom, where I mentioned to you, you can set accordingly to the temperature and the percentage of your fan spinning. So you will go according, for example, this temperature you've set, right, is based on the fact that if the motherboard go beyond 40 degrees Celsius, it will trigger 20% of the fan spinning. So this is what you meant, but most of the time we will set it to CPU, because CPU is the one that, you know, really go up high on the temperature itself. So this is the hardware monitor. You can set all this, so it's pretty straightforward. And you can, best part is that you can monitor all over down here. I don't have to, you know, go into sub menu and such, which is kind of like clumsy. Next will be security, whereby you can set a supervision password. If you do not want people to touch your configuration on the UEFI, you can set one password, or you can add another password for, let's say, your sibling and such. So the master password is you, and the sibling will have another password. Now for secure boot, right, for those of you playing Valorant, make sure that you will set this. Okay, right now, let's see. How come I can't set? Wait, let me have a look first. This is strange. Oh, okay, it's enabled. Oh, okay, so sorry about this. I didn't have my M.2 installed. So at this portion here, right, if you were to play Valorant, right, make sure you set the secure boot to custom. So sorry I can't show you here, my bad. Then next will be the Intel Platform Trust. This is meant for your I mean, it's enabled. Let it be enabled, because this will allow you to install Windows 11. Now coming to the boot itself, you have all this function over here, so I'm not going to go into it. As you can see, the description are over here. Right, probably I go slow, let you see. Coming to exit, well, this is the part I think you guys are familiar of. It's either you save the changes and exit, you will reboot, or you discard the changes and to exit and to reboot. Discard the changes while you are configuring it, or you load the UEFI default. I will cut the chase and go straight to the point. This board is indeed very impressive. In fact, it has all the feature set and function of what content creators would want to have. And besides this, for overclockers too. Now, starting off as a content creator, this board has tons of USB port, which is good, as you know that we make use of all the camera devices and capture cards and such. So all this port comes in handy, especially this two Type-C port, whereby it has a transfer rate of 40 gigabits per second. So when you transfer large files, right, this would be definitely good if your device is able to transfer at a rate of 40 gigabytes per second, that is. And besides the transfer rate, this two port over here, as mentioned to you, you can project out external monitor. But of course, this will make use of the integrated graphic on your processor and not on your discrete graphic card. Having to say this, right, if you want more monitors besides using the discrete graphic card, which is around 3 monitors, you can add on to additional 2 more monitor over here, which is making use of the integrated graphic card, which is brilliant. Also, these are charging ports, which in turn I can make use of this as a power source for capture devices and such. So it's all into good use. And as for the front itself, right, this port is also very powerful in a sense that it not only has a transfer rate of 20 gigabits per second, but it does do charge your mobile devices, or things like your tablet, your iPad, your iPhone 15 and such, and it's fast charging. Similar to the rear, when I mentioned about the Thunderbolt port, you can use that as a charging port too. And why am I saying the front is pretty powerful? Because when I do the transfer rate using a M.2 enclosure, which I did test it out, I don't get any intermittence when I transfer a very big file, 100 gig or so. And some boards which I've used, right, when I make use of the front type C, and it does have a 20 gigabits per second, but sad to say, when transferring large file, right, you get intermittence or you get cuts off, so I have to redo the transfer again. And why is this so powerful? Because it's being supplied with additional power that's coming from your PSU 6-pin PCIe connector to this, and it has a power delivery of 60 watt. And I did try plug my capture device with this port just as a power source, and it's rock stable. Besides this, bonus point to content creators, whereby this board, right, offers lots of M.2 storage. Starting from the top, you're able to run generation 5, which is, you know, if you intend in future to change your M.2 from generation 4 to generation 5, you can do that, not an issue. And all this M.2, surprisingly, you do not need to purchase additional heatsink just to cool down your M.2. All is being supplied, and all these are rock solid aluminium. And especially for the top, right, it's quite thick if you intend to put a Gen 5 M.2. But the only thing that you need to take note is that make sure when you mount this in the case, right, you have good air circulation, as in like airflow, as all this M.2 are passive cooling. Now, when talking about overclocking with this board itself, right, it has more than enough power phase, which is 24 plus 1 plus 2, my goodness, and has a choke capacity of 105 ampere. Because to overclock just a 3900K or 13900KS, right, you only need 90 chokes, that's all, 90 ampere chokes. But this is more than enough to cater for that. And bonus point to this, whereby this structure, right, compared to the original Taichi, I believe this board will overclock much better. Why do I say so? The structure of the rear I/O, it's solid aluminium. You don't have plastic pieces, whereby the original board, right, you have the plastic pieces for your ARGB and such, and it just seal off this area over here. So as you know that for any ARGB, right, it will generate heat, so there is no way for it to dissipate fast, right. What happens is that it will go back to the PCB, and having the PCB warm, your processor, your DDR5, I mean your RAMs, your VRM, or even your M.2 will not be happy. It will not perform that comfortably. And some of you have witnessed some of my videos I mentioned about this. If you're able to get your motherboard temperature lower, your VRM, your RAMs, and your M.2, right, will be more than happy to draw whatever power that is sufficient at a lower wattage to push the performance. Now, when you overclock using this motherboard itself, as I mentioned that this is hollow, why is this a bonus point? Imagine that you overclock it. I mean, you overclock the processor and the VRM is sitting up, right? This will dissipate heat through this rear heatsink. And since this is hollow, when the airflow, right, it also goes into the hollow area and to push out whatever heat that's beneath here and also at the top. So heat dissipation will be very fast on this motherboard itself, and definitely your VRM will be happy about it because it's like fast transaction on the, the dissipation of heat. So that will enable it to overclock even better, or to perform even to a extent better than its original Taichi board, which has all the casting and such. And this board itself, when I look at the design itself, I like the design. As you know that my intro is all about gear, that's why I like it very much. Places whereby it's not overblown, like all this gear, right, when you place in inside a case itself, right, it will be very subtle. See all this gear. The only prominent logo that you will see will be the Taichi and this ASRock logo over here. That's all. And just a touch of lightings, as I show you, there are ARGB under this undergrowth on the last M.2. If you do not want that, you can just turn it off, as I show you on the UEFI. You can do it on the UEFI. You don't need to actually install the application on Windows itself. And this is something which I like, whereby there are no additional background resource hogging ARGB program on Windows itself, which will be made in good use on other applications when you're doing your work. Alright, what else do I want to, oh, speaking of which, okay, I find that this board is pretty unique, whereby you have two clear CMOS button. I was looking throughout and was thinking that, well, one thing downside, whereby most of the mid-tier board or high-end boards, you have the BIOS flashback, but this board does not have that. And I'm thinking that if ASRock were to improve on this, as in like, you can leave the clear CMOS short pin over here, but why not set this to be a BIOS flashback button instead of, you know, making it as a clear CMOS button, which I find that, well, having two, I wouldn't say it's redundant, but it would be better if you could set one of them, right, probably over at this end. You can leave it this end and to remove off this pin and to put a button over here for BIOS flashback. And with the BIOS flashback, you can make use of the debug LED as an indicator. So these are some of the suggestions that I would to suggest. Besides that, I don't see anything much faulty about. Oh, the layout of the fans, I have not mentioned about it, because the thing is that one thing I missed out to talk about, there is this centerpiece whereby you have this 4-pin PWM fan header. It's chassis fan 1. I believe this is meant for you to plug your front fan, the cable, to here, but I find it not really that fantastic. You draw the cable across. I would rather put the front fan at the bottom, which is this connector over here. As for this, right, I hope that they will move it to the back, so that when you place the rear fan, right, you can tuck underneath the armor shield and to plug the connector if this connector is over here. So you'll make the arrangement very tidy. I hope you guys have enjoyed what I've shared with you, and special thanks to ASRock to have provided this board for me to share with you guys, and to Tech Dynamic to have do the arrangement on the delivery. If you are new to my channel, welcome to my channel. If you like my content, do remember to subscribe and to click on the notification bell button. Till then, take care, goodbye, see ya.